Okay, so welcome back. And this next video, I wasn't sure I was going to make it today, but the weather is fantastic, and so there's a lot of sun, and I'm in relatively good shape. So I said, why not? Why not? And I was thinking of starting with Mr. Gable, but this guy came through first, and he was there was something a bit more urgent, or he was not urgent. He's saying it's not urgent. He said he just we discussed. He's saying we discussed about it, and I convinced you it'd be better to start with me because then you could put on the mustache and become Mr. Gable, and then do the Gable one because it wouldn't make sense the other way around. I tried finding things about him um, on the internet, but there's really nothing really written about him or no personal information about him. And he says it's going to be funny because if people who know me watch this, I'm going to freak out that I'm really out here, he says. So it's kind of interesting how he came in. He was sort of already there, and I didn't realize it. And then one day, I was just really inspired at work to go and see his website. He's got a wonderful website, and it's got all his work on there, and his family's very generous to share the work. I think he makes me feel like he's a very generous, kind, and loving man. And he showed up almost at the same time as I had finished Grace, and he's very he was really kind with me. I don't know, he was just sort of helping me find my own connection to my own beauty. And that was his life work. He was really about the beauty of women. And he's not really a Hollywood star, but he says he's very Hollywood. He was just too lazy to be a film director, so he was a photographer. He was showing me in the conversations that we had, like peace. He showed me he was profoundly and deeply a hippie, but not sort of the kind of hippie you would imagine when you say the word hippie. There's this guy who's got long hair. He never really had long hair. I don't know. He showed me the army, and I'm not sure if it's the army or it's. I think he was in the army, but he's not. He doesn't want to talk about it. But it's sort of. I feel it helped him to become like a very free spirit. He didn't. After that, he just didn't want to be anything like the army, and it doesn't feel like. It feels like it's important, but not really important to him. And he was showing me, I was looking for Uma Thurman, and I ended up on his website. And Uma Thurman, not in her 20s, but now, like today, and she was a very, there was something very touching to me because I used to edit pictures, and a lot of photographers want everything cleaned up and removed, and he would leave a lot of stuff, and he would even like purposefully do the makeup in a way that it looked messy and like the makeup was running. He was very influenced, of course, by the 1920s and 30s silent movies, and he was sort of just always flying by the seat of his pants. He wasn't really anyone that was like serious in a way. He always had fun, and he knew his life was about having fun and being relaxed. Um, he was sort of, he wanted to be in front of the camera, but he knew he couldn't be. He's telling me, and he he was very attractive as a young man. He showed me images in my mind's eye, like this beautiful chestnut hair, like buzzed, a buzz cut, and he has these sort of wolf eyes, like deep set, kind of dog like. I don't know, like this energy of a wolf or a dog in his face and his eyes. Like his past life as Aboriginal. He was very close to nature, and he loved water. Like when I would go to bed, sometimes he would just swim around me, and he had these beautiful, beautiful green gray eyes, like stone colored, like the color of a stone, like a wet stone that's got a bit of moss on it. It was like that. Okay, very poetic. And he said, unfortunately, as he grew older, he became kind of a bear. But a very athletic man as well. And he loved the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And he was just all about peace and love. And as we grew more into this age, this the 2000s, he was just disappointed how everything was very commercial, and he dealt with it because he loved taking pictures and being a photographer, but he was kind of disappointed that it was he's kind of disappointed. Yeah, he's disappointed at how things are right now, but he says, I was very lucky, so I couldn't really complain. I was working a good deal of my life as a photographer and having fun and being close to amazing people and seeing amazing people. And he says a lot of photographers today, they just want the fame, and they don't understand that it's about sharing, your love for other human beings, and just how amazing it is that people put themselves in front of this camera and they're just vulnerable for you, and that doesn't mean you should take advantage of it. It's just being in front of the camera involves being so vulnerable, and so you have to give a lot of yourself to make a good picture and to just give. And you're a witness to that, and you're a director to that, but you think that because you're behind the camera it's aimed at you, but it's not. It's in part it is, but in another part it's aimed for someone else. And he's kind of sad that it's not about relationships. The great photographers, they had models that they liked to work with, and it built a relationship. And kind of like with directors and movie stars, some directors really loved to work with certain movie stars, and it created amazing work. And he says today people are just photographing anyone and everyone, and they're just, it's just going anywhere. It's just, pretty people make pretty pictures, he says, but it doesn't mean that it has any value beyond you just photographing a pretty person. And he says it's hard to explain, but when you capture the essence of the human spirit or a moment in a picture, it usually happens because you have a great connection with that person, and they're letting you see something amazing because they're letting their guard down. And that's just how it is, how it should be. And unfortunately, people are just now obsessed with images. They just want an image of a beautiful girl that looks weird or beautiful, or, with lots of makeup. But how about the actual human being that is there and that you have access to? It's only you, as the photographer, you can work with your subject to get them to that point where they can feel comfortable being completely themselves. And that's why I was so successful, because I just was open to people. Being a hippie helped a lot, he says. Being a hippie is wonderful, he says. Just don't do the drugs. He says you can do them, but no, don't overdo it. Don't. And so he really wants to say to this younger generation, really work with people that inspire you and touch you, and let yourself be surprised, and don't just look for a formatted image. Don't just look to your computer screen to see if it's a good image or not, because that's not what's going to make your photography great. It's more than that, and the rest is up to you. He says, I can't give you the recipe. I found my recipe, but your recipe is your recipe, and so there's nothing you can do. I'm going to continue channeling him, because this is what I got from talking to him before. And it's a pretty simple message. He says, I'm a simple man, and he's doing peace. I'm gonna do the Gable mustache, and we're gonna talk about why he loved women in drag. But some people would call it drag. He doesn't call it drag. We're gonna explain that. Before I do the mustache, because I want to glue an actual hair mustache, and I've never done it before, so we'll see about that. He says you're very serious. You're too serious for me. I'm like, I'm sorry. My nature is somewhat serious. I have somewhat serious nature. So he's saying the mustache or the androgynous. He doesn't want to call them men, because they don't really look like men, let's face it. Some of these very beautiful women are still amazingly beautiful when you make them look a little bit more like a boy, he says. They'll never really look like, most of them won't look like a man, but most of them can look like a teenage boy. And he says it's a connection to my own youth. Okay. He's saying I was a very pretty boy, and then I grew into a man. Okay. And that kind of bummed me. Okay. Sorry, I was not expecting that. He's saying it's a joke, but it's not really a joke. He's saying he says, I was a very pretty young man. I got a lot of attention when I was young. I was handsome, and and there's something about so I'm just going to put a bit of bronzer, because Mr. Gable was quite tan, and Mr. Gable is confirming. I don't know why I'm calling him Mr. Gable, because I never call him Mr. Gable, but I'm sort of feeling obliged to call him Mr. Gable. I'm going to tan myself, and I like this product. I'm going to put it down below. It's very spreadable. It's a bit orange for me, but I kind of like that for a man, like an orangey, bit more of an orangey Mediterranean. And incidentally, they're very similar in terms of looks. The image that I'm getting of young Peter Lindbergh is sort of he keeps bringing up wolfy. I don't know why. Like, he calls himself the wolf, or something to do with having wolf eyes. I don't know why. It's his thing. And so I'm just gonna put some on my temples. And he just keeps bringing that back, and I do feel it's connected to to a past life as an Aboriginal, and a lot of what he came with, the gifts he came of just being peaceful and being a very chill, peaceful kind of guy. Was he most of that life as an Aboriginal, he was very peaceful and chill, and he was just easy. He says people are so uptight now, and he's like, I was German, so for me to say that, he's like, my fellow German people won't be super happy. He's like, I love my German heritage, he says, but I was just a hippie. I just didn't fit in. So this is a different product from the Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly was more olivey. This has more red in it, and it's going to look, like I said, I think it's going to give more of a manly look. Whatever that's worth. So I want to put the bronzer first. I didn't put any foundation because really, it's really wonderful about guys. They don't need a lot of foundation. So yeah, he's talking a lot about that, and he liked the desert. Yeah, he's talking about the desert. He loved the desert because it reminded him of that life, and that's why he liked America so much. Not just because it was a place where it comes back a lot in his pictures, he's saying, but he's saying the desert was where he used to live as an Aboriginal, and he was in America during the when America was really expanded. When see, this is what happens when you channel live. When the British came from Britain, and also when there was a move towards the West, so he lived there in the West as an Aboriginal, and that's why he liked Los Angeles and that area. He had that life there, and I'm not gonna put blush because I feel like it shouldn't be blushed, but I'm gonna put another bronzer on top that's got a bit more of a blushy color. Does that make any sense? So it's got more orange in it, so it looks like the sun, like it used to be. Red is also a good color to put if you want to look like freshly burned. I'm just gonna put it on the nose too. I love looking tan because I don't really look tan in general, but it looks so good on me. It looks good on everyone, they're saying. So I'm just going to give that sort of glowy color. That's why I don't like using bronzers. I feel bronzers, they're more makeup-y. When you're using sort of these sorts of products, you're going to look a bit more real. So yeah, he's saying he liked and he liked beautiful women, but he would never dare to. He had a lot of respect for women, and he would never dare to take advantage of the situation, because he knew what he wanted more was to show the human spirit, and he knew it would crush the people if he did that. He's showing me he's had a lot of lives, and he's seen both sides. You know, he's been a woman, he's been a man, a human man and a human woman, and he's aware of the energy between the sexes, and he was very careful. He was just, you know, he never put himself forward, but in his pictures it was always about him, you know, because that's sort of the nature of. I'm just going to put just a bit of concealer just to. This is not a brightening concealer. It's actually skin toned. So it sort of it puts a bit of highlight, but not intense. So he didn't want to, you know, to him it was sacred. Yeah, it was like a sacred ritual. And he's saying it's something about also the chief. When he had his life as an Aboriginal, he was afraid of the camera, that it would steal his soul. I don't know why he's saying that. He's laughing. He's making me laugh because he's laughing. I'm not sure if it's a joke or if it's for real, so I'm just going to say it. And in this life, he would steal the soul, but in a good way. He wanted to show the soul, because it's true that the camera can steal your soul in a way, like it can suck you. And I was having a conversation with an actor that's not Clark Gable, and it's not, they're going to come in as a couple later. I don't know when. But they were talking about, in the camera, there's like this empty space, empty hole. And that's where it's like physics, you know, that empty space, that hole sucks your soul. And if you're not careful, and if you don't know how to give properly, and you don't know how to recharge yourself properly, it just sucks everything in. And he managed that gap. He would make sure that he wouldn't suck. He would let people give him the soul. And that's why some photographers' pictures are really strange, because they really want to suck people's souls. But he's saying his photography was always about framing the soul and not capturing it. I've put on a bit of a more appropriate attire for Mr. Gable. He liked to be called Mr. Gable. He liked that people treat him with respect. He says, people would go like, Clark, but he was very dignified. And I think I'm calling him also Mr. Gable because I think I worked with him in my past life, and I would always call him Mr. Gable. So I'm sort of having trouble not calling him Mr. Gable, but he insists on being called Mr. Gable also, that I call him Mr. Gable. And I am becoming Mr. Gable. I've taken a brow pencil and I've outlined the mustache. I've studied his mustache. It sort of goes downward. And I think it's very dashing. I look very dashing. And I even have, you know, partial bridge and 2 crowns on the top. So, you know, pretty close, I would say. Pretty close to the Mr. Gable charisma. And now Mr. Sorry. They're not dueling, because they would never do such a thing. They sort of want to combine everything together, and I decide not to combine everything together, except this image of approximation of Mr. Gable. And I also filled in my brows very lightly. I could make them darker, but he sort of had a good head of hair, but sparse brows and sparse stash. And what can I say? This is, I'm sort of freaked. The There's really no mirror behind this camera because I would be always looking at myself, and I'm one of those people. Okay, so it didn't stick. Wonderful. Hopefully this did stick. What did I get myself into? It's like you got no sense of fun. I only like the final result. We're all, he agrees, we're all playing, and this is Mr. Lindbergh. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm calling him Mr. Lindbergh. Peter, he's like Peter. So this is why I think I'm just going to let it hang like that. I'm sure this is going to be epic. Epic moment. He says give them the full moment. So I shouldn't be doing this on camera. He's saying, I just wanted to capture spirit, and I had also a format to work with. Like I couldn't show, and also I was a man of my time. And also, but I enjoyed just people being people. And he says that I think we complicate things so much, and he says he understands the feminist movement and why it needed to be, because the men really don't respect women and they think they're just objects or people to be used for sexual pleasure. But he's saying most men don't feel that way, or most men understand. So how is this going to look? Well, it's a good thing I'm going for choppy mustache because it is kind of looking choppy. And I was thinking of buying mustaches, but they're so big, like the actual stashes. Lovely. He's saying most men respect women. He's saying, however, they still do think that very sexually of women. He's saying that's the only thing that's kind of sad. When it comes to sexuality, there's a level that they forget the humanity because desire is such a strong thing, and it's very hard for a lot of men to control that. But usually as they get older, they get it. Especially today, he says, most men get it. It's just a few that say stupid things and mess it up for the other ones, he says. So I'm sorry I couldn't do both at the same time, do the mustache and talk to you at the same time. It's not exactly, I thought this would work, but it doesn't really work because it's all flat. But you know what? This is the best that I could do. I knew it was going to be a bad idea, but I still didn't because I wanted to have the experience of doing this. And I should have chosen, maybe I should have chosen the special goat hair to get sort of crunchy mustache, but I kind of didn't want to. I guess all of this is just to to connect um, Peter Lindbergh to Clark Gable, and I'm feeling quite strange. And Peter Lindbergh is, because while I was doing this, I was listening to the Stones, and actually all morning I was listening to the Stones. I had my breakfast, and I was getting myself in the mood, and I kind of didn't know what to expect. It's kind of funny. No, it's not kind of funny. It's very interesting to do this and to see myself with a stash. I think what's interesting, because he's talking to me, because we're both, I studied photography originally, but I couldn't get a job as a photographer, so, and I didn't really have much to say in my 20s about anything, really. I didn't know anything about the world. And he's saying and he's like, you should get into character. So I'm gonna get into character. And I could put more makeup around the eyes, but he's saying, don't do the full Peter Lindbergh thing. He's like, we don't want to copy me. And he says, I'm on to different things, but it was really fun being me, because I got to meet amazing people. And he says, I got to see amazing souls, and I feel very privileged. He says, if you've worked with me or in front of my lens, he's taking over, because I think he liked Clark Gable, because I don't see why they're both connected. I think he saw himself as a sort of Clark Gable. He loved the silent movies, so it's making sense that he'd rather be seen as Clark Gable than Peter Lindbergh. He says Clark Gable was way more interesting than I was. And he's saying that he wants me to really overdo this. He's saying, I'm so grateful. And he's saying, you have no idea how grateful I am when you came in front of my camera. Even if your career didn't become amazing, or even if you didn't get to be the star that you wanted to be, what we created was magic. And you have the magic just because someone decides that you're not sellable, because it says Hollywood has become more about selling and a kind of a commercialism that's not very sexy, he says. They think they're sexy, but they're really not. And he said, I was all about that magic, and Hollywood has lost the magic, he says. It's okay, people wanted to be real, he says. People wanted to have a realness, and that's sort of the price to pay, because they kind of threw everything out. And Hollywood is going to come back to something different. It's just a matter of time, he says. You know, it's gonna be here, but just not soon. And we're gonna have to work to bring back a sort of soulfulness to what Hollywood can create. And right now they're lost in superheroes, because, well, I don't want to say it, but he wants me to say it. Fake, you know, this sort of fakeness of everything. And they forgot about the humanity. And back then, there wasn't much, you know. There was just a camera, actors, and lighting and sets. And now it's become too big, and people should go back to something simple, he says. Like, my pictures, I didn't have the discipline to be director, and he's making me feel very sad because he couldn't do it. Like, in his life he was sad that he couldn't be a director, and this was the next best thing, but he was he realizes that the work he did was really important, and it's still very important, and people still need to be enjoying the work, because the work is all you can do as an artist. And he's saying you have to be dedicated to the work, and understand what you're doing. If you're just doing things to do things and there's no meaning behind it for you, then there's no meaning for the people looking at it. And he says today it's really easy to make beautiful images that have no soul. And I didn't really want to make beautiful images, I wanted to make soul. And so he says it's okay. It's okay that people want to make beautiful images, but he says, don't forget the soul, because this is real people, not a painting, not. And some people treat it like paintings. He says he gets it, but don't forget about the soul behind what you're painting, or taking a picture of, and forget about the being that's sitting in front of you. And they're more complex than the camera can show. And he's saying this is why he liked ambiguity in women, because it would show their strength, and something that the camera couldn't really always capture for some women. And he liked the strength of that. And he says Marilyn Dietrich is pretty hot. He says, I was totally influenced by the silent movies. What can I say? He says. And now I'm going to get into the Gable. I'm going to cross my legs, because Mr. Gable liked to cross his legs. And the Gable is warm. And he's very honored, actually, that I'm doing this. He wasn't sure I was going to do this. He's saying, he's winking at me, and it's sort of a private joke. I can't explain, sorry. So he's saying, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to come back next time, and we will talk, and we will share about leading men and men in general, and truly something to be said about being a man in society today, when most men are boys. But there's nothing wrong being a boy, but really we've forgotten a little bit about, as men, and he says, I'm pretty sure not a lot of men will be watching this. I feel like I shouldn't be having a cigarette, but it's going to make me look too feminine, he says. Don't ruin the fantasy. He says, where's your charm, gentlemen? And where is your feminine side? Because he says, ironically, everyone has both energies, and just because you're a man doesn't mean you have to act like a brute, and doesn't mean that you don't have to be elegant and refined. And I learned about all of that from country boy to gentleman. And perhaps in life we're needing a bit more gentleman. And so, see you in next video.
The party on the street.